For this portion of tonight's presentation on courageous conversations, I'm going to share with you some of the research that I did, and most of the things that you're going to see right now are images, because I also believe images speak more powerfully even than words. Love this quote by Matthew Kelly: "God is talking, grab a pen." So I invite you right now to grab a pen and a piece of paper and jot down any notes or any impressions or any thoughts, ideas that come through you as you watch this presentation. I firmly believe you can't heal what you don't talk about. So this group of people is from one of the recent protests, and they are talking. They are talking in ways that aren't with their words. They're talking with their presence and with what they are projecting on their signs. Solidarity is a word that has been bantered about these days, and to stand in solidarity with someone means to meet them where they are and stand in a place of unity as opposed to division. The next few images that you'll see are ones that I found that I believe beautifully represent solidarity. Except for this one. This one is one that represents another way of taking a stand, but this is more of a stand of protection, a stand out of fear. The couple at the top are protecting their home in St. Louis as a protest walks by. The one at the bottom left are people from Las Vegas that they caught that were trying to incite riots. The ones at the bottom right are people that are wanting to protect themselves from potential fear of riots. And the little boy at the top got together a march in St. Louis also with kids at his school to go out and join the protest. We cannot solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. We have to form new ways and new ideas about thinking about things that hit us as individuals, as groups, and as leaders. And as Catholic leaders, I'm sure you're always looking at new ways to solve problems. When I first started doing research for this presentation, I went back. In order to really figure out where we are, I wanted to look at where we've been, and I investigated what slavery was all about. And what I discovered was a lot of the slavery was African, it involved African tribes raiding each other's tribes in order to conquer, get the people, and to get the goods that were being promised first from Europe. And then the slaves went to North America, and then North America sent sugar, tobacco, and cotton to Europe that the slaves had helped them produce. So it was this triangle, and most enslaved Americans also were sent to South America and the West Indies, which I didn't know. So while many were sent to North America, more were sent to South America. The first slave ship came to the US in 1619. And here is an example of what a slave ship looks like. This particular ship was actually being rescued by Britain when they had abolished slavery and then went on a hunt to make sure that they tried to rescue and save slaves from slave ships that were still employing slavery. When I think about the African tribal people, I didn't know a lot about them. I think that we do tend to fear and judge things we do not understand. They were a system of all different tribes. It's almost like you think of it like the United States of America, and each state, kind of represented a tribe. And these tribes were, some of them were very matrilineal, that is, they were, run by the matriarchy or the women of the tribe. Others were very violent. And here are some images I would just like you to sit with as you contemplate what life in Africa may have looked like and what the people look like who were very strange to the settlers from Europe and North America that were in our country. I particularly love the beauty, the presence, the confidence, and the innocence of this African mother. And here is an image also, which is not quite as pleasant as the ones just of the Africans in their tribes. Here are Africans being sent and shipped into slavery. I also love to share stories, and one of the stories that really stood out for me is the story of Thomas Jefferson. While we know Thomas Jefferson as the third president of the United States, he actually was a slave owner. And one of his stories is the story of him and his relationship with Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings traveled to France with two of Thomas Jefferson's daughters to take care of them while he was a diplomat in France. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and Sally, when she was in France, was actually a freed woman. And Thomas Jefferson talked him into coming back to the Americas with him, and he guaranteed her that if she did, any children that she had would be freed at the age of 21. She actually negotiated that, so she agreed to come back with him. The assumption was that he was the father of her 6 children, and lots of research has been done to try and substantiate that. Thomas Jefferson also was a slave owner, and in 1801, he had people do research into the idea of scientific racism, and that was the belief that there was a different intelligence level in different types of peoples, and I think that part of this was to help him better support the idea of having slaves. There was also an idea that Africans didn't have a soul, so if they were slaves, it made it easier, I think, for the people involved. I love this image. The woman on the left is someone who definitely took a stand to help people escape. Her name was Polly Jackson. And in the middle is a poster advertising for slaves. And then on the right is an image of some of the people that were slaves. Next, we come up with a very brutal time in American history. 1915 was when the KKK started back up again in the United States. It had originated in response to the Civil War, especially in the South, where there was such unrest about the idea of giving up their slaves and the idea that whites were a supreme race and therefore should govern over others. I love this, the juxtaposition of these two photos, the marchers, and then the state troopers that were sent out to guard and make sure that there were no riots during a KKK protest. And there's the image of this little child seeing his own image in the reflection of the state trooper's shield. Shortly after this picture was taken, the mother came and grabbed the child, but that just really points to the innocence of children. 2 other people that really stand out in in approaching the 1960s, which were significant time of racial and civil unrest. 1955, we've all heard the story of Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat in the bus when she was on an all-white bus. She stayed and she actually was arrested. But before that, actually the person who did it initially was 15-year-old Claudette Colvin, and they didn't want to really make her name the poster child for taking a stand for racial equality, so they used Rosa Parks instead. Martin Luther King, obviously everyone knows his speech about I Have a Dream, and I love the image of him at the bottom right. I think he's trying to hold up the peace sign even though it looks backwards. This is an image of Black kids going into the ocean and white teens trying to get them out of the ocean. A little bit of prejudice there. I'm just going to be quiet and go through some of these other images of things that have happened in the 60s. This is a peaceful prayer protest, and this is one where Martin Luther King and many other people were arrested in front of the Monsun restaurant and motel. And here is an image where some of the white people who were staying at this all-white hotel invited some of their Black brothers and sisters to come into the swimming pool with them. The motel owner dumped acid into the pool. Now, from what I hear, the acid wasn't tough enough to really hurt anyone, but he said he was cleansing the pool. And then the right is actually a police officer jumping in to help get the people out of the pool, especially in response to the acid. Strange times indeed. 1960, little Ruby Bridges. This is a Norman Rockwell painting of her. She was the first girl to go into an all-white school, and she had to take many intelligence tests in order to prove that she was worthy, and she passed. So armed guards, U.S. Marshals, needed to take her to school on her first day. And here's the actual Ruby Bridges. She is currently a 65-year-old woman, and this is Ruby as a 6-year-old little girl. Here's another Norman Rockwell images, New Kids in the Neighborhood. This is about racial integration, a lot of which that occurred in the 60s when they, after the civil rights movement that was signed into effect in 1964. And then here's another where Black kids are going into an all-white school, and you just wonder the curiosity of the children. You wonder what they were thinking when these people that they have probably heard their mom and dads talk about all of a sudden came into their school. Harlem riots of 1964, they were incited based upon the killing of a 15-year-old boy named James Powell. And his story was that he was murdered after there was a hosing down of Black people, and the people who were doing the hosing down said that they were trying to cleanse the street. And of course, people were agitated and upset afterwards. And James Powell supposedly ran into one of the nearby buildings. You know, I think he might have even had a rock in his hand, and he ended up being shot by a police officer. 1967, the Loving Law was enacted, which for the first time granted permission for interracial couples to marry. On the left-hand side is a picture in the late 1800s of a couple that defied the laws and married anyway. They could have been jailed, and a lot of things happened to people who went past the color divide. 1968, I Am a Man March in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Martin Luther King was scheduled to speak. He actually did a speech on April 3rd of 1968 during the I Am a Man March. And the idea for this march is these men were taking back their status as men because they felt like their treatment had been dehumanized. April 3rd, this is from the I Have Been to a Mountaintop speech, which was the last speech that Dr. Martin Luther King gave in Memphis, Tennessee. The next day, he was shot on his balcony by Lee Harvey Oswald. One of the things that I thought was interesting in this speech was that he said, I've been to the mountaintop, and he'd like to live a long life, but he's not sure that that is going to happen for him. But he wanted to let him know that he has seen the vision of the future, and he is no longer afraid. So let's go now to the 2020 social unrest. There's so much going on right now. It feels like we are hearkening back in some ways to the 60s of so much civil and so many protests going on. In some ways, I'm sure this has been sparked by COVID because we're so tired of being inside. But this is also a time where our youth are taking their voices to the streets, and where there is response. There's such a divide and polarization in the world these days. You've got one group arguing with another group. Sometimes there are riots, and Martin Luther King has this great quote that says, a riot is the language of the unheard. Great quote. Wow, clearly the idea of riots disturbs us all, but I wonder what we are not listening to. love this poster. So Black Lives Matters is on the edge of everyone's tongue these days. I've got the little boy that you saw earlier, and I love what the little girl's poster said. That's, we said Black Lives Matter. We never said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter. We just need your help, because right now Black lives are in danger. I'm getting a little emotional here because that sign really touches me. One of the things that's going on now is such a fear for the lives of Black people in this world. The Black Lives Matters co-founders are listed on this page, and it was actually formed in 2012 in the response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. And Trayvon Martin was also a 15-year-old boy that was in a hoodie that went to get some Skittles and some kind of a drink, and a security guard saw him leaving, probably because he had the hoodie on, I don't know, found him to be suspicious and ended up shooting him. And just a year later, and actually 2 years later, Mike Brown in St. Louis, Ferguson area was also shot, and the Black Lives Matter movement really gained momentum. The quote from the website says, "Every day we recommit to healing ourselves and each other and to co-creating a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported." So whatever, forms Black Lives Matters have taken right now, and I know it's very controversial, the idea is to create and support equality. Here's a picture of Trayvon Martin, 15-year-old, and Michael Brown, 16-year-old, both shot and killed. And then we have Breonna Taylor, who was shot and killed in her home, and Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot and killed when he was out for a jog. So this isn't just about George Floyd. I know George Floyd is the poster child for everything that's going on right now, but it is really a response to African Americans, Black people not feeling safe in the world. And so many Black mothers I've spoken with and seen videos on really fear for the safety of their children. I have a great little video that I'd like to show you when we talk about the idea of white privilege. And that was a concept that I really didn't know much about, and until I started doing some research on it. And I think this video says it far, far better than I could say it. So I really like that video. I think, like I said, it tells more. So what's the way forward here? I like this quote from, I think she's a teenager or a young adult, named Jamie Altman. We have to learn new behaviors and learn old behaviors. And the way to do that is to research, read, and listen. For those of us who haven't directly experienced racism, we need to accept that we are going to say the wrong thing sometimes, but that shouldn't stop us from doing the work. And I love what Maya Angelou shared, and that's know better, do better. When we look at the past and we look at all the things that happened, there were so many contradictions, and there were so many people trying to find their way in the world, and some of us did it way better than others. But as we continue to walk forward, I think it's up to each of us to decide what kind of world we want to live in. And as John Fitzgerald Kennedy said, let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, because we know these days that is so polarized, but let's seek the right answer. Let's not just seek to fix blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the creation of our future. What kind of future do we want to create? So a couple of the things to do when you are looking to have a courageous conversation, 3 things are important. One is be curious. Get involved in an inquiry. Ask questions, but ask them gently and not intrusively. And listen to learn, and perception check. And that is asking the person that you're talking with, as you reflect back what they said, did I hear that correctly? Second is be present. The greatest gift that you can give to anyone is the gift of your presence. And meet people where they are. And I'll say more about this in just a little bit. See the loving essence of the person in front of you. And then the other is have a beginner's mind. Don't prejudge and don't assume you know the answer. Really enter into dialogue with people with your whole heart and your whole mind. We build bridges instead of walls when we muster up the courage to speak authentically and listen open-heartedly. And to quote Jesus, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. I will resume this video in just a moment. I will resume our presentation in just a moment. Thanks.